When we were doing this, I was like, oh man, I haven't seen Chris in like 2 years. And I was like, oh no, I saw him like a month ago in LA. And you told me you'd been taking swimming lessons.
Yes, I can swim now. I can like jump in a pool and not drown and go around, but I want to be able to like jump off the yacht, swim to shore, swim like that.
I mean, usually you jump off the yacht, they let you back on after you go for a swim. You don't have to go to shore.
It's a whole different type of swimming when there's no wall right there.
This is like rich people's swimming problems.
I'm trying not to sound like one of those Eddie Arsenio interviews where they know each other and think it's so hip. And they just laugh through the whole thing. Remember the other night at your house?
I feel like a lot of times we'll catch up and I'll tell you what I'm doing in my career and then you tell me that I'm making a huge mistake. Like, hey, I'm gonna record my special. I'm gonna record it in this show, this theater I like in Toronto. Toronto? No one gives a fuck about you doing a show in Toronto. You gotta record the show in the Garden. And then I do that.
Okay,
and then,
I was right. I was absolutely right about
absolutely right. And then this time, I told you, hey, we're shooting the new season. I'm not in it. You're like, you're not in it? Are you fucking crazy? Why are you not in it? And then I think it's worked out.
I think you pulled it off. I think you did an amazing job, and all the acting was ridiculously amazing and powerful, and I could relate to both characters, and it was just some of the best TV I saw all year.
Oh, you know. Well, thank you very much.
If my word means anything.
Hey, it does to me.
I told you as soon as I saw it. Plus, you know, my daughter, so, you know, she's like knocked it out in one night.
Yeah, some people told me they watched it in like one sitting, and I'm like, whoa, that's a heavy night.
What inspired this Les Aziz version of Master of None?
I was originally supposed to be in half the season, and the season was supposed to be 10 episodes, but the half that I was in was not COVID friendly. Like, it had international locations and you know, just more locations, and it was just not a kind of thing you could film right now. And it was like fully ready to go before COVID. We had a cast, we did the table read, everything. And then like in March, they called and were like, hey, this COVID thing seems kind of serious. We're gonna like shut down for 3 weeks and see what's going on. And then, you know, obviously COVID became what it became. And around like August, I think things were starting to shoot again in London. And so myself and Alan, we talked about it, and we called Netflix and Universal, and we were like, hey, like, what about trying to get Master of None going back again now that things are starting up? And, you know, the other script was, it's still too wild to try to do during COVID, but Moments in Love is like the dream COVID script. It's just two ladies in a house, right? So, we talked to them, and they were like, yeah, we think we could do this, and, you know, obviously it was a conversation of like putting it out by itself, and we just felt really passionate about the story, and we did it. And, you know, look, there was definitely a moment at one point I was like, man, like, should I just like, am I crazy? Like, you know, should I just do this story like with me and you know, some actress and do the same kind of beats? But you know, when I thought about that, I was like, I've seen that a million times. Like, what's so interesting to me about doing this story and what we made was like, there was so many of those scenes every day on set. I was like, I've never seen this scene. I've never seen two black women talking about who the father of their kid is going to be, and all this stuff was just so fresh and exciting to me. Like, I was excited to step back and just be a director and get to tell the story with Lena and Naomi.
How do you know Lena? Because, you know, in show business, you have like these friendships probably don't happen outside of show business?
So it's basically, it's Allison Jones, our casting director, who's, you know, legendary casting director to casted Freaks and Geeks and all sorts of stuff. She, like, when we were doing season 1, she was like, I just want you to meet some people, just some people I think are interesting that you could maybe use in the show. And the first person that we met, that me and Alan met, was Lena Waithe. And, you know, all these people are coming to these meetings and everybody's kind of saying the same story. Like, oh, I've been taking improv classes and blah, blah, blah. And then Lena comes in, like fully formed as a character, wearing Jordans, looking like Lena in season 1 of Master of None. And I was like, oh my God, like this is a fully formed character right here. Like I've never heard this person on TV and I heard this kind of, conversation put in a show. And it was really exciting to Alan and I. The character that we had for Denise was, it was just written as my friend. She wasn't written as gay. She was written as straight. And what's crazy is at one point, like, it was like, well, is Lena gonna play straight or is she gonna play queer? And it's like, which now sounds like completely insane. But we were like, no, she should play queer. Like, that's so much more interesting. All those conversations.
Yeah, that's like saying, is Ice Cube gonna play black or Irish?
Yeah, but that was like a real thing that came up at some point, And it's like, oh no, we're just gonna make the character her. Like that's what's exciting to us is she seems really charismatic and interesting. And then obviously, in season 2, like with the Thanksgiving thing, she kind of grew. And then like now, like when I called her to do Moments in Love, like she's this big, mogul and all this stuff, but still the same person in her heart. But yeah, it's just cool to just see how she really evolved. Because I remember we were working on the scripts, and there was definitely times where I was like, is Lena gonna be able to pull this off? Like this is like some pretty heavy lifting acting wise. Like she hadn't really done like acting on that level. And then when we started doing the auditions to find Alicia, she would just read the scenes, and she was so funny and was just like improvising so much really funny, like honest, real stuff. And I was like, oh my gosh, she's gonna really kill this. And I think she did.
I always thought she was good, but now I realize she's great. I didn't realize she was great because when I watch your show, and I'm not saying this because you're here. I just thought you guys were friends. I thought this was just one of Aziz's weird friends that he just, because I went to your house. You got a whole crew of non-comedian friends that you kind of keep to yourself. I thought somehow, some way, you and Lena Waithe had known each other for 15 years. That's how good your chemistry is on the show.
No, I just met her, a few months before we cast her in the show.
So you're telling me that was a casting? God damn.
That's Allison Jones.
Have you guys ever hung out outside the show?
She's like always like producing stuff. She's like producing this probably somehow. And
No. She works more than everybody.
Yeah. And so I don't see her a ton, but we do talk on the phone. And like in between the second season and Moments in Love, like I talked to her on the phone a few times, and we would talk about relationships, and we talk about like balancing work life and our personal life. And those conversations were really kind of the seeds of what became Moments in Love, because it was interesting to me that me and her, despite being completely different people with different gender, sexuality, etc., still had at this root level the same fears and concerns and everything about love and relationships and career. And I just found that so interesting, and the idea of like us working on that story together and using her character to kind of explore all this stuff was exciting to me.
Where'd you find Naomi? Because it's really kind of her story.
When we cast Naomi, I remember telling her like, hey, you're in the show more than I am. Like you're in the show more than anybody, and you've never been on it before. So like, please don't fuck this up. But we found her, we were just reading people for Alicia, and it was really hard because Lena was so charismatic, and she also has this huge cachet because the audience already knows her character. So it's like, all right, we really got to find someone that can go toe-to-toe with her. And like, in the auditions, we're like reading these, some of these scenes where there are arguments, and Lena would just destroy people in the arguments. And it's like, all right, well, who can really go toe-to-toe? And then we read Naomi, and, Naomi, like, she's like, had a lot of like buzz around her. And then when she read, she was pretty good. And then like on her second read, I was like, hey, like just kind of do this. Don't do an American accent. Just do it as you. Like forget Alicia. Just do this as Naomi. And then she really opened up and really got what we were doing, and she was amazing.
Wow, wow. So she was a lot better. Yeah, she was better as herself than hiding the accent.
You know what's weird is I realize, like, whenever you have actors that are doing an American accent, it's not always super easy. And if you ask them to change lines and improvise and stuff, sometimes it's a little hard. And like, so the guy that played Darius, he's British, right? But whenever he showed up on set, he would only do his American accent because he's like, I've got to stay in the American accent because you like change lines and stuff, and I can't keep going back and forth. And so he would just keep the American accent.
So we know your crew on screen. Tell us about your relationship with Alan.
Alan Yang is a co-creator of the show. Alan was a writer on Parks and Rec, and you know, we were both like pretty young when we started doing Parks and Rec, and we got along well. And then, you know, by the time Parks was wrapping up, we were like, let's do a show that shoots in New York, that's like our show. Like, we both wanted to move back to New York, and, you know, Netflix was like so new. Like, when we went to pitch to Netflix, like, Netflix was so young, like, they only had 3 posters on the wall. These were the only shows they'd done at this point. Orange is the New Black, House of Cards, and Lilyhammer.
I mean, how does the partnership work? Do you guys in the same room? Is it, do you guys have to coordinate your schedules? Is it like a band?
This season was a little different, you know? Like, in the other seasons, we had, like, a writer's room, and, like, me and Alan would run the writer's room. This time, we didn't really have a writer's room, you know? I talked to Lena on the phone a lot. I told Alan this idea, and I said, oh, I'll write this one, this Moments in Love thing with Lena, and I talked to Lena on the phone a bunch, and I just had all these long conversations with her, and I kind of wrote the drafts based on those conversations. And I was in London, and Lena and Alan Lena and Alan are in LA, so I was just kind of traveling and just writing when I had time, and then eventually I just had the drafts, and I sent them to Lena, and she would just send me voice notes and send back like her passes on the script, and that's kind of how we wrote it. We were never really in the same room. We were just mostly just talking on the phone and just passing back scripts like that. So, I mean, we really wrote it more like you'd write a movie or something. Like, you know, it wasn't like a big room of people, you know, chiming in with ideas.
You never got together?
We never got together in person until when we're, you know, when we were doing rehearsals and stuff. Then we get together and we're reading it, and then, you know, reading it with Naomi. And then once we're on set, you know, we rewrite it again. Like, I think we're constantly trying to kind of rewrite it.
I mean, the style of this season was so different than anything you kind of see on TV. What directors have influenced you in general, and what directors influenced this season of Master of None?
Well, I would say the earlier seasons was definitely influenced by a lot of 70s American cinema. You know, whether, you know, it's cinematographers like Gordon Willis, you know, we would use dollies a lot and kind of having that brown tone. I wanted to really move away from that and do something different. And, you know, I was watching a lot of slower cinema. You know, directors like Ozu. You know, for people that are watching, maybe don't know, Ozu's, you know, Japanese director. He'd never move the camera. A lot of his stories just take place, you know, in a home. And, you know, they're pretty, it doesn't seem like a lot happens. And at the end, you get this, like, emotional gut punch that's, like, a different feeling than you get from any movie, you know? And it's really powerful. And all these guys, they kind of, you know, they kind of have this skill of doing more with less. And the really big influence is this director, Chantal Akerman. She's Belgian, I believe. And, you know, she did this movie called Jean Dielman that I was really into. And it was like, it's like kind of a movie that a lot of DPs like Harris Savides, that was an amazing DP, fortunately passed away. You know, he did a lot of cool movies with Gus Van Sant and did stuff with Sofia Coppola, and he was obsessed with this movie, and it is really interesting. She like did these things where she'd really hold on her for a long time, on the main character, doing things like washing dishes or, you know, making meatloaf or cleaning the bathtub. And at first you're like, well, what's going on here? But then at a certain point, it becomes very hypnotic. And, you know, that was obviously an influence on, you know, the stuff we did with Lena and Naomi, where it's like, you know, Lena after, you know, spoiler alert, after like cheating or whatever, is sitting there washing dishes, and you just have to live with her in those moments. And, you know, showing the moments and the scenes that you don't normally see, I thought was interesting. You know, instead of just seeing the fight where you know, fight with the person after you're busted cheating, like, what happens then? It's like, yeah, you gotta clean up your house. You gotta like pick up the underwear. You gotta go wash the dishes. You gotta live in all of this very, very nasty detritus that you've left from your antics, you know? And to like really hold on these people and live with them in that, I think is really powerful. And you know, that was really the influence in terms of like shooting that way and not cutting and not using coverage. Because anytime, like there was early shoots where we did use some coverage, where we did like shoot some coverage. But whenever I looked at it in the early edits, like it was like you were breaking a spell, you know? Because like when I was just with them and they were just talking, it felt so real. Like you were really with them for a moment. And then as soon as you cut to a close-up, you're like, oh yeah, I'm watching a show. I remember, I'm watching something.
Staying on her was genius. You don't get punished for your sins punish you. So you don't get like, you know, a lightning bolt doesn't hit you because you cheated. What happens is you realize you loved the person you cheated on and you really fucked up. You know what I mean? Like that, your sin punishes you.
Yeah.
And that's what happens in those scenes, washing the dishes, cleaning the place, just being in her, just having to deal with herself. You know what I mean? It was just very powerful.
Yeah, and there's just a power in like really holding. Like, you know, I was thinking about, someone was talking to me the other day about Roma, and you know, Alfonso Cuarón does these amazing long takes, and one of the scenes that I really remember from Roma is the scene where she gives birth and, you know, it's a stillborn baby. But the camera just, you know, it's with her for that whole thing and it never cuts and you're there for that whole thing. And you just really get sucked in a way that you won't get sucked in that same way with the kind of normal tricks of close-ups and stuff. And also you get this power when you do use a close-up, like when we finally use a few close-ups in the IVF episode with Naomi, they have such a different power because you've never been that close on her face, right? So when you finally get that close, it's got a way deeper meaning and emotion behind it than if you were used to seeing her like that all the time, you know?
How did it feel directing the full season?
It was a lot different in the sense that, you know, I really approached it like a film, and like I wanted to direct all the episodes because, you know, I wanted it to have a consistent tone throughout. In the past, you know, in the other seasons there'd be different directors, and sometimes I wouldn't, you know, I directed a few of the episodes, but I would step away sometimes, and I was also acting. This time I was just directing, so it was interesting to really craft the whole thing together, you know, and really work with a cinematographer the whole time, and like really kind of key in on, especially since we're doing something new, as far as like the cinematic language, like figuring out what that is, making sure it works, and it was also a little easier because I could kind of track everything a little better because I could track their performances and I remembered everything. I remembered every scene and everything we were doing, and to not have to act and just to really be there as a director, I don't know, I just found it really, really fun. I mean, I'm not saying I like don't want to act anymore, but it's pretty fun to just kind of really just be a director. So like sometimes when I'm writing stuff now, when there's like, you know, an Indian guy in his 30s, I'm like, that could be me, or do I just call Riz Ahmed?
What do you want people, viewers, streamers to take away from this season of Master of None?
You know, I think what's interesting about it is like, even though, you know, it's such a specific story in one sense, it's about this queer black couple living upstate in New York, I think the things they're dealing with and the problems that they encounter are very universal. And, you know, so many people have told me that they've watched it, and even though they're not, you know, a queer black woman, they might be, you know, an older black man or you know, young straight white woman, whatever, they still relate to it, and you know, I think that's what's cool to me is like it is, even though it's this specific story about these people, it's a universal, they're universal, it's a universal story in another sense, and I hope. You know, I hope people's takeaway is the takeaway I hope they always have when they watch Master of None. It's like, hey man, we're all just people trying to figure this shit out, and everybody, we're all in the same boat together.
What's next? What are we doing? Let's get together. Let's do some stand-up. Let's work on some scripts. Let's just do this, man.
I'm in it. I'm in.
Let's work on our crazy heist movie. Bunch of comedians stealing something. I don't know. Aziz!
Thanks.